Stop the music. Isabella's voice rang out sharp and clear, cutting across the ballroom before the band could finish their smooth Sinatra number. The violins screeched to a halt, the trumpet player froze mid-breath, and 100 heads turned toward the young woman standing near the center aisle. Her black satin gown shimmered under the chandeliers, but it wasn't her dress that silenced the room, it was the defiance in her eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. Olivia Hale, radiant in her white Vera Wang gown, blinked as though a stranger had just stepped onto her stage. Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice carrying an edge beneath the practiced sweetness. Guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but riveted. A murmur rose from the back. "Isn't she the waitress from that midtown diner?" Another whisper. "What is she doing here?" At the edge of the head table, William Whitaker's jaw tightened. He had invited Isabella Diaz to this wedding for reasons he hadn't fully admitted to himself, a reckless whim, an act of defiance against the woman who once broke him. He had expected whispers, maybe even a little envy. What he hadn't expected was for Isabella to command the entire room with 2 words. "Stop the music." She repeated it, softer this time, but with the kind of authority that made security hesitate before taking a single step. She turned slowly, her gaze locking on Olivia. "There are truths," she said, voice carrying in the hush, "that no string quartet can drown out. Not tonight." A ripple of unease swept through the ballroom. Champagne flutes trembled in polished hands, and the clinking of ice in crystal glasses seemed suddenly too loud. Olivia straightened her spine, flashing a tight smile. "Who is this woman?" she demanded, her voice brittle beneath the veneer of charm. Her groom shifted uncomfortably beside her, avoiding Isabella's gaze. Isabella's eyes did not leave Olivia. "You know exactly who I am," she said, stepping forward with deliberate grace, heels striking the marble floor like a judge's gavel. The journalists in the room, meant to capture a society wedding, raised their cameras eagerly. The first clicks of shutters sounded like gunfire in the quiet. William's breath caught. He had thought Isabella would blend in just enough to make Olivia notice his defiance. Instead, she was unraveling the wedding like a seam pulled loose. Isabella paused beneath the chandelier, the crystal light casting a halo around her dark hair. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "This day was supposed to seal your future, Olivia. But it will expose your past instead." The words landed heavy, like stones dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through the gathering. Olivia's hand clenched around her bouquet, knuckles whitening. "Get her out," she hissed to security. But the guard hesitated. Too many eyes were watching. Too many whispers already spreading. A woman near the front gasped. "Evidence," she whispered to her husband, as though the very word had been summoned from the air. Olivia's composure cracked for a fraction of a second, a tremor betraying the fear behind her polished facade. Isabella took another step closer, unshaken. "The truth has waited long enough," she said, her voice unwavering. "And tonight? It refuses to be silent." William's pulse thundered. He had walked into this ballroom to watch Olivia marry another man, resigned to a role of bitter spectator. But now he realized the night would not be remembered for vows or champagne. It would be remembered for this moment when a woman no one expected took control of the story and demanded that justice finally be heard. The band sat frozen, their instruments lowered. And the ballroom glittering, gilded, meant for celebration had transformed into a courtroom. And Isabella Diaz, the waitress he had thought was a pawn in his scheme, now stood as its fiercest prosecutor. The wedding of Olivia Hale would never be the same. 48 hours earlier, the scene could not have been more different. The clatter of forks against chipped plates filled the small Astor diner on 8th Avenue, where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the smell of burnt coffee lingered stubbornly in the air. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when the city belonged to night shift workers, taxi drivers, and the lonely. William Whitaker sat in a cracked leather booth at the back, his tailored suit jacket folded neatly beside him, though the loosened tie at his neck betrayed the storm he carried inside. He had just opened the ivory envelope that had arrived earlier that day, an invitation embossed in gold, announcing the marriage of Olivia Hale to Charles Montrose, heir to a shipping fortune. He read the lines again, his jaw tightening, as if the words themselves mocked him. Olivia, the woman who had once promised forever, now broadcasting to the city's elite that she had chosen another. His glass of whiskey sat untouched, the ice melted into nothing, mirroring the hollow ache in his chest. For years, William had built his empire with precision. His name whispered with respect across Wall Street. Yet all his power could not erase the humiliation of this moment. The invitation was not merely an announcement, it was a message. Olivia wanted him to know she had won. He sat in silence, staring at the condensation ring on the table. when the sharp clang of a coffee cup snapped him out of his trance. "Sorry," a voice said quickly. He looked up to see a young woman balancing a tray with practiced ease. She wore the diner's faded red uniform, a pen tucked behind her ear, and a smudge of coffee streaking one sleeve. Her name tag read Isabella. She had the kind of tired grace that belonged to someone who worked too many hours and trusted too few people. Yet her dark eyes were steady, alert, unafraid to meet his. William studied her longer than he meant to. She set down a fresh pot of coffee on his table without asking. "Refill?" she asked. Her voice was low but firm, carrying no trace of servility. He nodded, and as the steam rose between them, something in her manner unsettled him. She moved quickly, refilling other cups, handling a grumbling taxi driver and a pair of loud teenagers with the same cool detachment. She belonged to this diner, and yet she seemed to stand apart from it, as if her presence carried a weight the neon lights could not diminish. William's gaze followed her unconsciously, until she caught him looking. "Long night?" she asked, sliding the check onto his table. He gave a dry laugh. "You could say that." Her eyes flicked to the unopened whiskey beside him. "Looks like you're losing a fight with something stronger than coffee." He almost smiled despite himself. Most people in his world wouldn't dare speak to him that way. "What's your name?" he asked. She glanced at her tag. "Isabella. But I'm guessing you already read that." He tapped the wedding invitation lying half-hidden under his jacket. "Do you believe in making statements?" She tilted her head, wary. "Depends on the statement." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "How would you like to make one with me?" She frowned, unsure if he was mocking her. He continued before she could answer. "I need someone to accompany me to a wedding. No strings, no expectations. Just, stand beside me." Her laugh was soft, incredulous. "You're asking a waitress from a diner to be your date to a society wedding?" He shrugged. A hint of recklessness in his eyes. "Why not? I'll pay you more than you'd make in a month here." Isabella's smile faded. "Money isn't everything." He held her gaze, suddenly serious. "No, but sometimes presence island." She studied him in silence, the clatter of dishes filling the pause. Something in his expression, equal parts pride and vulnerability, made her hesitate. She had seen men like him before, but rarely had one admitted, even indirectly, to being wounded. Finally, she said, "Why me?" He leaned back, as though the answer were obvious. "Because you don't flinch. You walk like someone who's already lost everything and survived." Her eyes narrowed. But she said nothing. Behind her, a cook shouted an order, and the smell of frying onions wafted through the air. She glanced toward the counter, then back at him. "One night. That's all." Relief flickered across his face, though he masked it quickly. "One night is all I need." When her shift ended an hour later, William insisted on driving her home. His Cadillac Escalade gleamed under the streetlight, out of place among the row of dented sedans and delivery vans. She slid into the passenger seat, silent, her gaze fixed on the glowing skyline. As they pulled away, the city stretched out before them, full of secrets and shadows. Isabella leaned her head against the cold window, watching the neon signs. The ballroom of the plaza pulsed with the hum of wealth and reputation, crystal chandeliers scattering light across polished marble floors and gilded walls. Journalists lingered near the edges, cameras poised, while waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of lobster tails and glasses of Napa Valley Chardonnay. Isabella Diaz stepped into this world as though she had always belonged, though only William knew she had come from a diner less than 2 nights ago. The black gown he had chosen for her clung elegantly. Yet it was not the dress that drew eyes but the way she carried herself, chin high, shoulders steady, gaze unshaken. Around them, conversations faltered as people whispered. "Isn't that Whitaker? With someone new? She doesn't look like his usual type." A man in a tuxedo adjusted his cufflinks nervously. "That woman speaks like she's been to the Met Gala." Isabella had already been tested. Within minutes of arriving, she navigated the maze of introductions with disarming ease. When a hedge fund manager mentioned his art collection, she countered with knowledge of a recent Metropolitan Museum exhibit, describing brushstrokes with a fluency that startled him. When an ambassador's wife spoke of the upcoming election, Isabella replied with insight into community policies in the Bronx, grounding her argument in the struggles of ordinary citizens. Each exchange left her companions intrigued and unsettled. William watched closely, at first amused, then unsettled himself. He had expected her to remain silent, a mysterious presence by his side, but she shone brighter than most of the guests. He realized with unease, that she was not merely surviving this room, she was conquering it. Olivia Hale noticed too. Across the hall, draped in silk and diamonds, she tried to maintain her dazzling smile for the cameras, but her eyes betrayed her. She caught William's gaze once, then flicked to Isabella, the muscles in her jaw tightening. When she raised her champagne flute to toast, her fingers trembled slightly. A string quartet swelled behind her, their notes graceful, yet the air between the two women vibrated with tension. Guests began to whisper, leaning closer to one another, their curiosity sharp. "She's not just a date," one murmured. "There's something more." At the head table, Olivia leaned toward her groom, Charles Montrose, whispering something through clenched teeth. He nodded stiffly, but his eyes followed Isabella too, as though sensing the storm building. William sipped his wine, forcing himself to appear calm, though his mind churned. He had brought Isabella to unsettle Olivia, but now even he was uncertain where this was heading. He glanced at her profile, calm, unyielding, yet her eyes flickered once toward the bouquet in Olivia's hand, a flash of recognition passing through her face. It was gone in an instant, but William caught it. He made a mental note there was something here he didn't yet understand. As dinner was served, the tension deepened. Isabella sat poised, her fork and knife moving with quiet elegance, as if she had grown up attending such dinners. Guests attempted to probe, asking where she was from, who her family was. She deflected gently, offering half smiles and vague answers that only deepened the mystery. "The Bronx," she admitted once, and the table fell into awkward silence. But then she added, "Community makes you stronger than any gilded wall." And the conversation resumed, more cautious now. Olivia's laughter grew sharper, brittle, her attempts at charm forced. She leaned into conversations with investors, but her gaze kept darting back to Isabella, unable to mask her unease. William leaned closer to Isabella once, murmuring, "You're doing more than I ever imagined." She did not look at him. "I didn't come here to play your games, William. Tonight isn't about you." Her words chilled him. He wanted to ask more, but a journalist appeared, snapping photos, and the moment was lost. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Isabella reached for a glass. But as she did, her gaze fell on Olivia's left hand. The diamond sparkled beneath the lights, but Isabella's eyes narrowed not at the gem but at the band itself etched with a delicate design she recognized. Her chest tightened, though she kept her composure. It was the same emblem she had once seen stamped on documents in her father's office, the ones that had vanished before his ruin. A ripple of recognition coursed through her, but she masked it with a sip of wine. Olivia caught her looking and smirked, mistaking the moment for envy. "Lovely, isn't it?" she said loudly, drawing attention. "A custom piece. No one else in the world has one like it." Isabella met her gaze evenly. "On the contrary," she said softly, almost too soft for others to hear. "I've seen it before." Olivia froze, her smile stiffening before she turned away, clinking glasses with another guest to cover her disquiet. William had heard enough to frown. He leaned closer to Isabella. "What did you mean by that?" She shook her head, her eyes fixed on Olivia. Later. The music swelled again, but the undercurrent of whispers grew stronger. Guests sensed the fracture, the invisible line drawn between the bride and the mysterious woman at William's side. Even the journalists shifted their focus, cameras tilting away from the couple of honor toward the dark-haired stranger who seemed to command the night without effort. As dessert was served, Olivia could no longer contain her unease. She rose, tapping her glass for attention, her smile stretched tight. "Friends," she announced, "thank you for celebrating with us tonight. Before the dancing begins, I'd like to welcome you properly." Her words rang hollow, and a bead of sweat glistened at her temple. She turned deliberately toward Isabella. "And to our unexpected guests, I hope you enjoy yourselves. Some things," she added, voice pointed, "are better admired from a distance." A few guests laughed politely, but most shifted uncomfortably. Isabella rose slowly, every movement deliberate, her chair scraping softly against the floor. The air seemed to still as she faced Olivia. Her voice carried, calm but unyielding. "Distance," she said, "is exactly what you've relied on, Olivia. Distance from the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd, the atmosphere trembling on the edge of revelation. William's heart pounded. He realized in that instant that Isabella had not come here to play a part in his revenge, she had come to settle her own. The ballroom, with its golden light and glittering tables, was no longer a celebration. It was becoming a battlefield, and Isabella Diaz was no longer simply his mysterious guest. She was a force of reckoning. And for the first time that evening, William understood that he might not be in control of what was about to unfold. The silence that followed Isabella's words in the ballroom was electric, brittle as glass. Guests shifted in their seats, exchanging startled glances, uncertain whether to laugh off the tension or brace for something explosive. Olivia's lips tightened into a practiced smile, but her eyes betrayed her fury. She set her champagne flute down with a clink sharper than intended, the stem quivering as though it might snap. "That's enough," Olivia said sweetly, though her voice carried a dangerous edge. "Security, please escort Miss Diaz out. This is my wedding, not a stage for theatrics." Two suited guards began moving forward, but Isabella raised her chin, unafraid. "You can try to silence me, Olivia," she said, her voice clear. "But you can't erase what you did to my family." Gasps scattered like sparks in dry grass. Olivia's mask cracked for a fraction of a second before she laughed, high and brittle. "Family? I don't even know who you are." Isabella stepped forward, her heels echoing like a gavel against the marble floor. "You know exactly who I am, Isabella Diaz, daughter of Miguel Diaz, the man whose company you and your father destroyed." A stunned murmur swept across the ballroom. Several older guests straightened in their seats, recognition dawning in their eyes. William froze, the name striking a chord in his memory. Miguel Diaz, once an entrepreneur in renewable energy, swallowed whole by a sudden scandal, his reputation left in tatters. William remembered the whispers of fraud, the abrupt collapse, the tragic suicide that followed. He stared at Isabella, piecing it together with a dawning horror. Olivia's eyes flickered, her composure slipping before she forced another brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said. "My family has nothing to do with whatever fantasy you've constructed." Isabella's voice sharpened, slicing through the room. "Fantasy? My father kept every document, every letter, every deal you buried under fake shell companies. You left him with nothing but debts and shame. And when the truth closed in, you planted evidence to ruin him completely." A murmur of outrage rose from the crowd. Journalists leaned forward eagerly, cameras snapping, capturing every syllable. The groom, Charles Montrose, looked bewildered, tugging at Olivia's arm. "What is she talking about, Liv?" he whispered, panic creeping into his polished facade. Olivia shook him off, her face flushing crimson. "Lies," she snapped. Though her voice cracked, William's mind raced. He had brought Isabella here as a distraction, a weapon against Olivia's arrogance. But this was something deeper, more dangerous. He glanced at Isabella, whose steady eyes brimmed not with malice but with grief sharpened into steel. She wasn't performing, she was testifying. One of the guards reached for her arm. William rose suddenly, his voice ringing out. "Wait." The room hushed. His reputation carried weight here, even the guards hesitated. He turned to Olivia, his voice low but firm. "Is it true?" Olivia scoffed. "Of course not. This woman is a waitress clinging to fairy tales." Isabella's lips curved faintly, but her eyes never left Olivia. "If I'm just a waitress, then explain why your assistant has been shadowing me all night, trying to get his hands on my bag." Every head turned toward Olivia's longtime aide, standing pale and rigid by the wall. The aide stammered, "She's lying, but the moment was enough." Suspicion thickened the air. William's stomach sank. He remembered small details now, the way Olivia had dismissed Miguel Diaz years ago, the strange timing of her father's acquisitions. Threads he had ignored now twisted into a noose. Olivia's facade collapsed further. "Get her out," she screamed. The sweetness gone. Fury unveiled. "Now." The guards moved again, but Isabella pulled a slim folder from her clutch and held it aloft. "Touch me, and this goes straight to the press before midnight." "I came prepared, Olivia. Every forged document, every manipulated account, it's all here." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Some guests shouted in shock. Others hurried toward the exits. Journalists swarmed forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Charles Montrose stepped back from his bride, his face pale as ash. The ballroom descended into pandemonium, voices rising like a storm crashing against gilded walls. Charles Montrose backed away from Olivia, his confusion plain, his once proud posture collapsing into disbelief. "You told me it was gossip," he muttered. His voice caught between anger and fear. Olivia's face blanched under the chandelier light, but she lifted her chin, clinging to composure. "She's bluffing," she insisted, pointing toward Isabella. But her words sounded thinner than the air around them. Isabella stood firm, clutching the folder like a torch in the darkness. Her voice, steady and unyielding, carried above the din. "This isn't bluff. Every forged contract, Every hidden transfer is right here. You can silence me, Olivia. But you cannot silence paper. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the room, catching William's eyes, and holding them for a beat. Or memory. The journalist surged forward, flashes bursting like gunfire. Guests pressed in, torn between scandalous thrill and horror. The guards hovered, uncertain now, caught between Olivia's shrill orders and the tidal pull of public scrutiny. And then, the moment that changed everything. The district attorney of Manhattan, a silver-haired man named Harold Brenner who had been invited as a guest of honor, rose slowly from his table. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze sharp and cold. "Miss Diaz," he said clearly. "May I see the documents?" The room fell into breathless silence. Olivia spun toward him, her voice trembling. "Harold, you cannot seriously entertain this nonsense." But his gaze did not leave Isabella. "On the contrary, Olivia. When someone makes a claim this specific, in front of the wedding, that had begun with champagne and promises now ended with flashing cameras and the rustle of legal documents." Olivia Hale stood cornered, her gown gleaming white under the chandeliers yet stained with the shadow of exposure. The district attorney's investigators moved swiftly, taking possession of the folder Isabella handed over. Each page bore the weight of betrayal, signatures and numbers that told the story of ruin. Olivia tried once more to salvage her facade, raising her voice to the crowd. "This is a setup, she is nobody. A waitress. You all know my family, you know our legacy." But her words rang hollow. Too many eyes had seen her crack, too many whispers had already taken flight. Charles Montrose stepped away from her, his expression one of cold betrayal. "You lied to me," he said softly. Yet the quiet tone carried across the room. "You dragged me into this without telling me the truth." Olivia reached for him, but he pulled back, shaking his head. "I will not be married to a fraud." Gasps rippled through the guests. It was not Isabella who had broken the engagement but Olivia's own unraveling under the light of truth. Olivia's assistant tried to slip quietly toward the exit, but two officers intercepted him, guiding him firmly back. He muttered excuses, but his face was pale, sweat glistening under the bright lights. William watched all of it with a heavy heart, his hands clenched at his sides. He had thought this night would be about his own wounded pride, a chance to unsettle Olivia by flaunting another woman at her wedding. Instead, it had become something far larger, far heavier. He looked at Isabella, who stood steady though her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. She had not come for revenge or spectacle. She had come for justice. Olivia's father was not present, but his name hung in the air like a ghost. Everyone knew now that the Hale fortune was tainted, built partly on the ashes of Miguel Diaz's collapse. The whispers that once circulated in boardrooms were now shouted in headlines by the press flooding the hall. "Heiress exposed in scandal," one journalist muttered into his recorder. "Wedding crumbles amid fraud allegations." Olivia's veil slipped from her head, catching on the marble floor, as she turned desperately toward the DA. "You can't arrest me here," she snapped, her voice cracking. Harold Brenner's expression was stern but calm. "You are not under arrest tonight, Miss Hale. But this evidence will be reviewed by my office. You will be expected in court. I suggest you prepare." With that, the room seemed to exhale, all at once. Guests stood, gathering their things, eager to flee the spectacle yet unable to look away. Olivia's groom left her side completely, walking toward the doors without a backward glance. Olivia stood frozen, alone, her perfect world collapsing around her like shattered glass. Isabella's chest rose and fell, relief mingled with sorrow. She had done what her father never could. She had spoken the truth aloud, in front of those who once ignored it. William approached her slowly, his eyes searching her face. "You didn't tell me," he said quietly. "You didn't tell me this was about your father." Isabella looked at him then, her eyes wet but unyielding. "Would you have believed me if I had?" He hesitated, the question cutting deeper than he expected. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I believe you now." She nodded, her gaze shifting back to Olivia. "I didn't come here to ruin her wedding. I came here to stop her from burying him twice." William felt something stir within him, a respect he had not anticipated. He had brought Isabella here to provoke, to wound Olivia in the shallow game of pride. But Isabella had turned the night into something meaningful, something that mattered. As the last guests slipped out and the press swarmed after them, the ballroom grew quieter, echoing with the faint hum of equipment being packed away. Olivia sat in a chair, her gown sprawling like spilled milk, her head bowed under the weight of shame. No one rushed to comfort her. She had been the queen of the night, but queens fall hardest when their crowns are made of lies. Isabella gathered her clutch, slipping the strap over her wrist. The DA gave her a nod of gratitude as he passed, carrying the folder of evidence. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. Her throat tightened, but she managed a steady reply. "Justice isn't pride. It's peace." William walked beside her as they left the ballroom. The chill of the winter night hit them as the doors opened. Snowflakes drifting gently under the glow of the street lamps. The city roared faintly in the distance, horns and voices blending into the eternal hum of New York. Isabella paused on the steps, slipping off her heels, her bare feet pressing against the cold stone. William frowned. "Are you all right?" She smiled faintly, a fragile but genuine smile. For the first time in years. They stood in silence, watching as a police car idled at the curb, waiting for the assistant who was being led out in handcuffs. Reporters shouted questions, microphones waving, but Isabella ignored them. She closed her eyes, breathing in the cold air, letting the snow land gently on her face. "The truth always finds its voice," she whispered. William looked at her, his heart heavy yet strangely lightened. "And from now on," he said quietly, "you won't have to speak it alone." She glanced at him, studying his face, then nodded. But she walked a step ahead of him, her posture unbent, her path her own. Together, they descended the steps, leaving behind the glitter and ruin of the night. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, each note a reminder that time moves forward, that justice, though delayed, can still arrive. And as the snow fell heavier, covering the footprints of the guests who had fled, Isabella's own footprints remained clear, marking the path of a woman who refused to be silenced. A daughter who had carried her father's truth into the light. For those who had watched, the night would be remembered not for its broken vows, but for the moment a waitress became a witness, and a ballroom transformed into a courtroom. And for Isabella Diaz, it was the night she laid her father's memory to rest, not in shame, but in justice.